Hi there, I'm Vincent Boss and I provide dating and self-improvement advice. And in today's podcast, we're going to be discussing why your ex is orbiting you. I provide audio coaching for breakup recovery, trying to get an ex back, attracting someone new, and life coaching. Visit www.dateme.tips for more details. Please check your spam and junk folders if you are expecting an email from me. So now let's get back into today's podcast, and today we are discussing why your ex is orbiting you. So if you have been dumped and want to try to get your ex back, you might find it strange if your ex is viewing your social media, asking people about you, or appearing at places where you are. In today's podcast, I'll be discussing 3 reasons why your ex is orbiting you. So let's get straight into this, and point number 1 is they're worried about you. Now, I would suggest that when I say that dumpers might be orbiting dumpees because they're worried about their former partner, I would suggest that generally speaking, this is in the early days. Now, this doesn't mean that they're not going to be worrying about you in the future, but from my research, particularly in those early few days and weeks post-breakup, where they know full well they've ended the relationship and quite possibly broken your heart, that they are going to be worried about you. Now, it's a common misconception that dumpers don't care for dumpees. Most dumpers do care. Most dumpers are concerned that their dumpee is suffering. Most dumpers didn't want to hurt their ex, but they felt they had no choice but to end the relationship. Now, if you're a dumpee and you were dumped a few days or weeks or maybe even a couple of months ago, and you find out that your ex is orbiting you, they're watching your stories, you have a friend of a friend who has told you that maybe your ex-dumper is asking about you, or perhaps you were at your class or your group or your club and you see your ex kind of within the vicinity, whereas normally they wouldn't be, this is quite likely because they're worried about you, and they're almost trying to check up upon you to make sure that you're okay. And they might be doing this from a distance rather than actually communicating with you directly, but it doesn't mean that they care for you any less, okay? Now, if you're a dumpee, you might be thinking, well, okay, does this mean that they're going to try to get back into the relationship? Well, unfortunately, right now, if your ex-dumper is orbiting you due to being worried about you, then sadly this isn't a sign that they want to reconnect. It doesn't mean they might not want to reconnect in the future. It doesn't mean you can't get your ex back. But what it does mean, if it's connected to worry, is it suggests that right now they are concerned about you, but they haven't grown the romantic emotional attraction necessary to want to get back in a connection with you. So if you hear this and you're a bit confused, what you have to understand is that when you and your now former partner are in a long-term loving relationship, you would have both felt a high level of romantic emotional attraction for one another. Now, sadly, for various potential reasons, your now ex-dumper lost romantic emotional attraction towards you. And when it hit the necessary low point, this is when they likely actioned the breakup. But it doesn't mean that they don't care. As I said earlier, it doesn't mean that they're not worried. So what we can see here is that the level of attraction is low, but they can still have a human concern for you. You, of course, mean a lot to them. This could be the classic, they love you, but they're not in love with you, which dumpees often hear and feel confused and upset by. But what it means is that your ex-dumper is feeling love towards you. They feel love maybe in a platonic sense, maybe just in a respectful sense, and that is very, very good. It's, of course, good to be loved in any way. However, right now, unfortunately, they're not feeling the romantic side of that love. And for you two to get back together, they need to regrow that level of romantic emotional attraction to the necessary high point, and this is when they would likely try and reconnect with you. Whether or not you do this would be up to you. Right now, you're probably thinking, well, yes, of course I would. If my ex-dumper contacted me and said, let's get back together, I would jump at it. But maybe in the future, you will see things differently. Yeah, you might not believe me, but there are so many dumpees who, if and when they hear from their ex in the future, actually decide they no longer want to go down this path. But I digress. And when we're focusing on why a dumper might be orbiting you, it's so important for me to bring up the fact that if it's in those early days, weeks, maybe a couple of months, this is more than likely because they're worried about you. They've ended the relationship, they've broken your heart, they realise that there are earthquakes going around your world, and they want to check up on you, they want to make sure that you're okay. It doesn't mean, in most instances, that they want to reconnect at this time, because if they wanted to get back together so soon, then why even end the relationship? There needs to be time to pass for both people's feelings to evolve and to potentially rectify that attraction level. But right now, if you are in those early days, weeks, maybe a couple of months, and you find out that your ex is watching your stories, or you find out they're asking about you, or kind of in and around where you are at physically, it's probably because they just want to make sure you're okay. And there's nothing wrong with that. Now, if you feel that this is not something you want to take place, and this is maybe connected to social media, for instance, then you do have the option of removing your ex from social media, maybe blocking them. But you've got to be careful with this, because if you block them, you remove an avenue to showcase positive growth, you remove an avenue for them to reach out to you possibly, and this is not something I would really suggest if you want to try to get your ex back, unless your mental health is really suffering. If your mental health is really going downhill with this, then of course you need to use this as your guiding light. You need to do what is right for you and to protect yourself. But if you can manage during this time to see that your ex is viewing your stories, then that's not necessarily a bad thing. Again, if it's other ways, maybe your ex-dumper is asking mutual friends about you, you can try to be as clear and concise as possible to those mutual friends that you're okay and you're positive and you're living your life to the full. Because if you don't and they pass on somewhat negative information back to your ex, this isn't going to grow attraction. If your mutual friend tells your ex that you're really struggling right now, they're probably going to feel sorry for you, but they're not likely to feel romance towards you. So I would tell mutual friends that you're going to be okay. Yes, if you're struggling, speak to friends who don't know your ex, speak to your family, speak to a local doctor perhaps. But mutual friends, be very, very careful, because even if they say they're not going to tell your ex what you're telling them, they likely will. So now let's get into point number 2 and the second point of today's podcast. Please like this video if you're watching on YouTube and subscribe to the channel. And point number 2 is they're curious about you. So when we talk about point number 2 regarding why your ex is orbiting you, one of the possible reasons is that they're curious about you. And I would say this is around 3 or 4 months after the breakup, 3, 4, 5 months post-breakup, we're seeing a situation where your ex-dumper, of course, they're still going to be concerned and worried about you, but at this stage, if they haven't orbited you already, it's unlikely that they're feeling that they need to check up on you, because if they were, they would have done it already. More than likely, if you find out after 3, 4, 5 months that your ex-dumper is orbiting you, it's probably because they're curious about you. But why would they be curious? Well, often it's because they've heard a few things about you. Maybe they've heard a few rumours. Maybe they've seen a few posts you've done online. And they're curious about your progress. Now, this isn't connected to negative progress. Some people believe that any publicity towards their ex is good publicity. I would disagree. If your ex-dumper is reading statuses that you post where you're saying how upset you are, this, like I mentioned earlier, is not likely to grow that romantic feeling that you need to within your ex's mind. Instead, they're more likely to be curious about you if they've seen, read, or heard positive things, positive progression, whether this is to do with your health and fitness and physical attraction, or more than likely, probably connected to growth you've done within yourself that might not be able to be seen necessarily, but certainly felt if somebody was to communicate with you, i.e. confidence. Sometimes somebody has very little confidence, but they become somebody who grows in confidence post-breakup. Initially, that fragile confidence may have been shattered, but somebody can regrow, grow, improve, and become a more confident person. This can also be connected to ambition. This can be connected to pushing forward and improving every single day. I always like to say you need to be a better person today than you were yesterday, and a better person tomorrow than you are currently today. If you live your life in this way, if you push forward in the respects that friends of friends will be passively mentioning great progress to your ex, maybe you're living your life in a way where you post things online and clearly, even if it's not deliberately, the things you're posting are more positive in nature due to your lifestyle now, well, if your ex-dumper hears, reads, sees any of this, they're more likely to become curious. And if they become curious, this is when they might really start to focus their energy on you once more and begin orbiting you, asking more questions, viewing your stories. Maybe they didn't view your stories for months, and then they've seen a couple of regular posts you've done, they've really felt intrigued and curious about this, and now they're watching your stories. That is an example of how curiosity can be built over time and get to the stage to where a dumper begins to orbit their dumpee. Now, if you would like advice and support about how to try and increase the chance of you one day getting your ex back, then you may want to consider my audio coaching service, where me and you can speak one-on-one about your unique specific situation. Go to my website www.dateme.tips for more information about how I can become your coach and your teammate via my audio coaching service. So now let's get into point number 3 and the final point of today's podcast about why your ex is orbiting you. And point number 3 is they're missing you. So if you're a dumpy and you want to try to get your ex back, this is the place that you want to be. You want your ex-dumper to miss you. Now, if they're missing you, then this shows that they've started to regrow romantic emotional attraction towards you. This is very positive, and this is why somebody would start to orbit their dumpee. Now, I would suggest that this happens around the 6-month mark and beyond, and it can take a varying amount of time. Sadly, not all dumpers will even ever get to this stage. But if you find out that your ex-dumper is orbiting you and it's 6 months or beyond, I would suggest that they're full on missing you. At this point, they're no longer going to be necessarily worried or concerned about how you took the breakup because it was so long ago. They're not necessarily going to be just curious because time has passed for both of you. You've gone down your own paths, your own avenues. You're living your own life, and they would have likely become curious about you sooner than this. If they're now full on orbiting you, I would suggest it's because they properly miss you. And this is not just down to you theoretically posting positive things about you or friends of friends passing on positive information, but it would likely be connected to if you have implemented my version of a no contact rule. So if you're not familiar with the no contact rule, this is something that lots of people suggest you implement if you've been dumped and want to try to get your ex back. However, there are many different versions of a no contact rule that you can find online, and I believe that my version will give you that best possible chance of success. So I suggest that you subscribe to my YouTube channel, check out the playlist I have there entitled The No Contact Rule, and then you can fully immerse yourself in my version of a rule. But if you find out that your ex is orbiting you, whether it is in the early days, a few months, or many months and beyond, what you're thinking at the moment is, how can I get them back from this point? And I would suggest that it depends on where you are in your life and where they are in their life. If you find out your ex-dumper is orbiting you in those early days, probably not likely that they're ready to connect. They might be worried about you, they might be curious about you, but they're unlikely to be ready to reconnect at this time. They're going through something that I like to refer to as the single honeymoon period, and they need to get through this. They need to get through to the other side, out of that tunnel, before their eyes are likely to be open to the possibility of getting back together with you. They need to self-reflect, and they're not likely to self-reflect until they've tried to live their life in a different way, which we have to remember is because they felt they was not comfortable going forward in a connection with you. So sadly, for whatever reason, they lost romantic emotional attraction. This is why they ended the relationship. And if you consider somebody making the huge decision of ending a relationship, you can imagine that they're not likely to think, oh, actually, I shouldn't have done that. Let's get back together. No, it's a big, big decision. So if somebody ends a connection, they're going to want to try things on their own path. They've made a big, big choice, and they now need to commit some time to seeing how things go in that way. But most dumpers will get to 6 months or beyond and realise that the grass is not often greener. So this is where we have to consider a possibility where a dumper will self-reflect. Have I made the right choice? Was this the right decision for me? And if they believe that maybe I've made the wrong choice, this is when the self-reflection can develop into thinking about you, wondering about you, and ultimately missing you. And that is why, if you find out that your expert dumper is orbiting you in various ways, 6 months and beyond, I would suggest it's because they're full on missing you. And this is a very good sign of them one day reaching out to you and you potentially being able to reconnect. It's not as easy as hearing from your ex and you're back together. You do have a communication stage to navigate, and then, of course, meeting up once more. But it's an incredible, exciting moment when you move from the no contact phase to the communication stage. And if you get to that point, you're one step closer to maybe getting your ex back. If you believe that this podcast has helped you, then please consider buying me a coffee. The link to do so is in the description.